Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Does that work?
We're going to see.
You want to try it first?
What, this here? Sure it works. Bam.
You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Donnell?
You ready?
All right.
We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say good afternoon and welcome everyone to the dissertation defense to Mr. Robert Muhammad. Before we get started, I want to let everyone understand kind of the layout of how this works. First of all, I want to ask those of you with cell phones, make sure that you've got them on silence, not either on silence. Initially, Robert will be presenting his work for 30 minutes. We have negotiated between 30 minutes, and so after 30 minutes, when he wraps up, the first thing we'll do is open up for questions and answers from the audience, as well as the committee. After your question and answers, we'll ask you to leave, and then we will talk with Robert a little more pointedly, more candid conversation, and then the committee will deliberate, and then we'll ask Robert to come in, and we will give him our decision. So with that, Robert, the room is yours.
Great. Please. Great. Greetings, everyone. Greetings. To my distinguished panel, I want to first and foremost thank you, Chairman Dr. Smith and Dr. Sin and Dr. Lowe, and of course my outside reader is Dr. Lewis. I want to thank you for taking time to and sacrificing and being a part of my dissertation committee. From the depths of my heart, I thank you for reading and rereading my work and giving me good correction. To my wife, Natalie, to brothers and sisters in the mosque, the activists that are here, people who have supported me all this time, thank you so much for your patience with me over these years as I pursued this academic degree. And I know that y'all have been on the front lines and I've kind of been absent in some cases, but I thank you for your sacrifice and for filling in the gaps when I was not there. Thank you so much. From the depths of my heart, once again, I thank you. And I want to thank, of course, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who allowed me to take a semi-sabbatical so that I could pursue this degree, this doctoral degree. And he told me to pursue it. He said to stand on the shoulders of the scholars and to look beyond the horizon. And I want to thank him. Okay, friends, colleagues, everyone who is gathered here today, thank you so much for coming. And we very much appreciate your presence here, humbles me, and I do appreciate it. But I got to get started before Dr. Smith throws the yellow flag on me, so for delay of game. Let us begin. What we want to talk to you about today, we're going to give you a presentation, of course. We're going to have an introduction. I'm going to give you my research and my hypothesis of the study. I'm going to talk about other literature regarding the subject matter that we'll be covering today. We're going to discuss methods on how do we prove or disprove our hypothesis, the data that we've collected, our findings, ultimately our conclusions and our recommendations. So let us begin. This is a research study, and we simply want to say that what we want to do for you today, we're proposing an equity-based planning theory and model to achieve a state of resilience in community redevelopment and to address X events. Let me give you some definitions to clear some words. Resilience is the ability or the capacity of a social ecological system to be able to absorb disturbance and maintain its structure, its identity, and its function, or the ability to adapt and transform into an improved stable state equilibrium, or to just, I'm gonna make it plain. It's gonna either, we're gonna bounce back or we're gonna bounce forward. And so this is what resilience is. X events, you're gonna find out what X events is. It means just that. X means the unknown. These are some events that are highly impactful. They come swiftly, they have long-lasting effects, and there's something that we need to prepare ourselves for. So we will see this model that we're showing you here. We're going to be talking about sustainable development, but what I want you to understand is that we're going to go from this model to this model, which is the planner's pyramid, which we will be discussing. as we move forward. Let's see. Okay, I'm doing well. All right, so first and foremost, there are definitions that we must deal with in terms of the planner's pyramid, or we should say sustainable development. Since this really is a study about sustainable development, the sustainable development theory, its practice, and the modeling of it. The acceptable, or there are many definitions for sustainable development or sustainability. They range all over, and many dispute what it means. But most accept the World Commission on Environment and Development 1987's definition, which is the present generation being able to fulfill its needs without ill affecting the next generation being able to fulfill its needs. Campbell describes it as thusly. He calls it development that is green, profitable, and fair. It's made up of three elements. It's made up of economy, environment, and social equity. These are the three elements of sustainable development. Hart says that sustainable development is when the system of those three elements are in equilibrium, with none passing a threshold that will take it out of equilibrium. So what we need to focus our minds on is equilibrium, and when I show you a model, symmetry, meaning that it's in balance, and those things are representative of course, sustainable development. Now, this is my visualization and to help you, to give you some mass as to what I'm talking about, because I just ran down a whole bunch of words, and I want you to have a picture in your mind of what we're talking about. We talk about sustainable development, social equity, economy, environment, and if these things are in harmony or in balance, or they're in equilibrium or they're symmetry, then we're supposed to have, in theory, sustainable development. I give you this Venn diagram where you have these overlapping elements of social equity, environment, economy, and if they overlap and they're in symmetry or they have equilibrium, then we have sustainable development. In other words, A equals B equals C, and therefore if A equals B equals C, then C equals A, symmetry, equilibrium, sustainability. All right. Now, Campbell, we talked about Campbell. And really my study began with the study of Scott Campbell's article on sustainability. And the title of it is Green Cities, Growing Cities, Just Cities, Urban Planning and the Contradictions of Sustainable Development. And so I've been asked by Dr. Smith to kind of lay into this one because I want to lay a base for you as we move forward and our respective time. Now, he gives us the priorities of each of the elements, and these priorities create conflicts. So when we look at, for instance, economy, the priorities is growth and efficiency. When we look at environment, it's the protection of the environment. And when we look at equity, we're looking at social justice, economic opportunity, income, equality. But what we need to understand is that for every priority, there is a conflict with something else. And what do I mean? If we're going to, I want a job, I want an economic opportunity, I'm a lumberjack. I need to go to work cutting down trees. However, the environmentalists tell me that there is a speckled horned frog there, or there is some kind of redback salamander. I'm just stating it. Or there's some endangered species. Therefore, you cannot cut into this forest. So the conflict is this development conflict where, what do you mean I can't have a job? I need to take care of my family. But at the same time, the environmentalists are trying to protect the environment. So too it is with a resource conflict in terms of growth and efficiency. If we're going to have economic growth and it's going to be done efficiently in a way, then we have to have production, and with economic production is the efficient use of, say, water, of energy, and of minerals. And so what we have is that we have an economy that's a carbon-based economy. We're steady poking holes in the ground, extracting out of it coal and oil. We're doing fracking and other things of that nature. And we have an economy that's so tied to that the environmentalists are saying you're damaging the ecosystem and we won't be able to survive, nor will the next generation be able to survive because we're using up all the non-renewable resources and we're not using renewable. So there's a resource conflict. And lastly, when we have social equity and we're looking at the economy as we see right now, we see this stratification of wealth going on in this country and around the world where the rich are receiving all of the benefits of the economic activity in the country. So the question is, if we say, look, you'll need to pay more taxes. Taxes is a form of taking away people's property. You need to pay more taxes. Why? Because they are poor people. They are people of the lower income. They're disabled. They are people who are disadvantaged that need the resources of the government, but the persons who have the economy by the chain said, no, that's my property, and we don't care anything about social equity. So this is the conflict that we have. And as long as we have these priorities and we have these conflicts, Campbell says to us, in truth, he drew this up. He said that he could have done any kind of polygon. He could have done any kind of shape, but he chose the triangle so that he would be able to display these on our behalf. But he said this is a useful model because it helps planners to be able to be mediators and negotiators with the things that they have to do in terms of being able to work in the public and being able to display this and to be able to balance these priorities and these conflicts. But Professor Campbell said, or Scott Campbell, the scholar, said this. He said there is no sustainable future. And he says, nor is there a strategy to achieve it. Then he went on to say that the model itself needs to be expanded. It needs to be expanded so that there would be an evolutionary approach to planning, and that evolutionary approach to planning would then take us from both the specific and the general, meaning the local and the global. Let us move on. I think I spent enough time on that. Now, let's get back to those X events. You saw this nice looking model here. It's all symmetry. It looks very well. But my dear committee, what happens when we have high impact, rapid events that take place that nobody could predict except in retrospect? What happens to us and to that whole model, that beautiful model I did when 9/11 struck? What happened when Katrina struck? What happened to all of that order? What happened to all of that symmetry? What happened to all that equilibrium? What happened to all that fine planning when these high impact, fast moving, long lasting events took place? I'll tell you what happened. In 2007, I looked at that and I looked at Scott Campbell's model and I said, well, we're going to have to make some adjustments. We're going to have to expand the model. And so we expanded the model in 2007 to include emergency management or safety, and to include civil defense and security. And of course, this set up what I deemed myself to call the disaster development pentagon, meaning that we went from 3 points now to 5 points. And I simply wanted to say that this is an expansion of Scott Campbell's, and it is an adjustment to these X events. But no, I thought I had it there, because as you can see, there's symmetry there. I put it together so that it is a finely organized pentagon. But then again, what happens? 2007 through 2009, it's really 2016, the recession is still going on. But what happens when the recession hit? So now you've got 9/11, you've got Hurricane Katrina, you've got the Great Recession. I'm just using those three as examples. But you could say Hurricane Ike. You could say the hailstorm that took place in Fort Worth, Texas, that caused $600 million worth of damage. You could talk about Hurricane Sandy. You could talk about the tornadoes in the Midwest and throughout the South. You could talk about the Zika virus that's coming and other pandemics that are coming. You could talk about drought in West Texas. You could talk about the Flint water crisis. All of these things are X events that we could have saw coming, and in many cases they're man-made, but they're assisted and aided by nature. So now, what does that model look like after these X events? Ooh, it's Dr. Lewis's favorite word. It is now transmogrified. which means that indeed it has been changed, it has been transformed, but in a very grotesque way. The inequalities that have taken place that were brought out by the Great Recession have us to see that all of this is out of equilibrium, simply for the reason is that when we traded in our security, we traded in our civil liberties for security. We all wanted to be safe. So many of us remain silent when they passed the Patriot Act. Many of us remain silent when the NSA is scooping up metadata and looking into our phone calls, our text messages, our emails. Many of us put up with long lines at the airport because we want security. So we see these subsystems now, we're getting out of our shape, out of whack, because we now are trying to accommodate that. What happened? We blew a hole in what was projected to be a surplus in terms of the budget, and we fought a war, went over and fought 2 wars on our children's credit card. So we spent $2 trillion for 2 wars. And so what we've done is we've created an inequitable situation in so much as now the poor are getting poorer, and you see the rise of Donald Trump's populism and also Mr. Sanders, Senator Sanders, because the inequities are in the community. It is an ugly, transmogrified model. I have to move on. Now, there are fallacies of the sustainable development model, simply this. One, it's static, it's fragile, and it's inequitably, or it's inherently inequitable. Why do I say that? Because even if we just limit it to the 3 elements of the sustainable development model, the literature bears witness that economy dominates the other 2. Social equity and environment are just hanging out with the economy. It's all about, as the young people say, cream, cash rules everything around me. It's about money, it's about dollars, it's about that. Third of all, there is no one element in the design of the sustainable development model that mediates and moderates the other elements to bring it into equilibrium when any of them get out of whack or out of balance. And lastly, this model, or the model that we've shown you, cannot account for these X events, these black swans, which are outliers that nobody can predict except in retrospect. I should have seen it coming. Yeah, maybe, but you couldn't have predicted these things that have come. So we'll move on. So the question for me is how do I get from here to there, to there, to here, and explain it in planning theory? Dr. Sen, I did everything I could. Looking in my 900 books and my 901 books, my planning theory and my urban theory books, I looked at rational comprehensive. I looked at incrementalism with Lynn Bohm. I looked at communicative action, Dr. Lowe, with Patsy Healy. I looked at advocacy planning with David Off. I looked at equity planning with Krumholz. I looked at just city theory with Ms. Feinstein, Professor Feinstein, and I looked at sustainable development as I've given you all those other scholars. I even looked at Andres Dewani's New Urbanism and Smart Growth, and I found elements of it that could explain the transmogrification or the transformation of the model and its breakdown and its collapse. But I couldn't find any theory except for one that now is being debated among planners, and as Dr. Lowe's has said to me, he's an agnostic when it comes to it, Panarchy theory, which has an adaptive cycle. It is also translated into resilience, thinking, and practice. But I too joined Dr. Lowe in being agnostic, because as being a social scientist, I have to look at this thing and be a dispassionate scholar of this particular theory. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this again is a model that I want you to understand. In the adaptive cycle, Panarchy theory is C.S. Hawling, who is an ecologist out of Canada. Initially, he wrote his seminal article in 1973, and thereafter he began to write subsequent articles about the management of environmental resources. And what he found is that as you fixed one thing, you affected the other parts of the ecological system. He began calling ecological management really a pathology. And then as they began to look at this adaptive cycle, they claimed, the theorists, the Panarchy theorists claimed that in fact this was a universal application that applied across disciplines. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it has limited application, which we will see later. But how we used it, I had to explain how this transformed. So there's a for loop. For loop begins with exploitation, rapid growth, and then it goes into a conservation or consolidation where there's an interweaving, an interconnection of all the elements of a model or a system. But then there comes a disturbance. There comes some kind of a collapse, a release, a creative destruction. And so it goes through a release. And then after it goes through the release, begins to reorganize itself. And so then as it begins to reorganize itself, it either does one or two things. It either goes down and out and becomes terminal, or it goes to improved stable state equilibrium, or it goes back again into that growth cycle, conservation, release, reorganization. And that basically is what resilience is about, this adaptive cycle. And this is what we have attempted to show you. Now, the Planet's Pyramid comes out of my study of all or much of our planet theory, and I've drawn from it various characteristics, and when we've come up with this definition for equity, which is the capstone of our model. Equity is the outcome of the process of the appropriate distribution of benefits and burdens within and across generations that results in the capacity of a social ecological system to have the ability to absorb disturbance while maintaining its stable state equilibrium, or the ability to adapt and transform itself into an improved stable state equilibrium. In order for this model to work, we have retained all 5 of what was in the planet's pentagon. We have retained safety, emergency management, we retained economy, environment, civil defense, and of course equity as the capstone. And we have chosen equity to be the capstone for this reason. We want equity to be, when we have the conflicts between civil defense and security, or when we have these conflicts of these priorities, we're asking equity, or we've designed equity so that it would be the mediator of these conflicts. And when any one of these particular base elements gets out of proportion, these subsystems get out of proportion, we would have equity to then moderate it. So equity, in order for this model to work, equity being the capstone, must therefore be the mediator and moderator of the base elements. To take it, and I can't call it making an onion because it's not round, but to take it and to open it up is for you to see the respective conflicts are contained within the equity being the capstone again, and it mediates and moderates the conflicts that take place within the model itself as it has been reorganized. Now, for our purposes, instead of it being symmetry, equilibrium, equal resilience, it only equals that if equity is the mediator and the moderator. Let us move on. That's all nice, but you got to prove it. They don't give away degrees here at Texas Southern University. You have to earn it. And so what is required of us is that we do methodology. In this particular case, what we've done is we've done an online survey, a convenient survey of planning professionals and practitioners in the 13-county Houston, Galveston area region of Southeast Texas. We have polled economic, transportation, environmental, emergency management, public safety, general agriculture, and public works planners and professionals. We use a mixed method of quantitative and qualitative analysis. This is the HGAC region here with the 13 counties displayed here for you. we set forth to try to get a sample of this region. I don't want to blow through this. This is very important. This is the survey. It has 7 sections in it. We got the data of the respondents. We had we tested the sustainability model, its definition. Was it a desirable public policy? Was it achievable? We polled them about the transmogrification of the model by external drivers or X events. And then we tested whether or not they considered a new model, would a new model be feasible? We tested resilience and its limitations. We tested equity, its definition, its new definition, the one that I've given. We wanted to see whether or not it was a mediator, a moderator. We posed a hypothesis question, specifically the hypothesis question as we put it forth. And then we dealt with a question that dealt with a nexus between resilience and sustainability. And lastly, we did an open-ended question so people could give us, so we could do some qualitative analysis of what they thought of the survey itself. Once again, the hypothesis of the study is that equity, as redefined in the proposed Planners Pyramid model, is the basis for resilience and community redevelopment. Redevelopment because we're looking at what happens after X events. We have some questions that are basically sub-questions that help feed into our hypothesis. They are as such. Does the sustainable development model, as it is designed, does it achieve sustainability? The other one is has this model been, second one is, has this model been transformed and therefore necessitating the addition of safety and security elements? Thirdly, we ask, is resilience applicable to planning theory and practice? And lastly, we ask, does equity indeed function as a mediator and a moderator element, thereby creating resilience or creating a basis of resilience for the system? All right. Okay, I think I'm doing all right. I think so. She's not grabbing the flag. All right. Now, we sent out 1,906 requests. We got back 186, but many of them were incomplete. The ones that we could use were the 114. We would be somewhat disappointed. We were looking for an N or a number, somewhere in the range of 500. I think 300, we could stand a little bit stronger and do some inferential, some projections as to what we say it means. But we feel good because of the kind of people that we received, which we will be discussing, the tenure of those who participated in it. Some 48% of them have 11 or more years on the job, and 18% of them have 7 to 10 years on the job. In terms of supervision, there was 33% of them had 11 or more people under their supervision, and 14% of them had 6 to 10 people under their supervision. A total of about 47% of our respondents had at least 6 to 10 or 11 or more persons under supervision. In terms of race, we weren't pleased because we know the demographic models show that the Hispanic group, non-white Hispanic Latino group, is the fastest growing. And this may be a reflection of their participation in planning and whatnot, planning discipline. But our breakdown was we had 49% were identified themselves as white and 45% black, and our non-white Hispanic number was like 5%, which we weren't totally happy with. But we did do all that we could to make sure that we could include them. We kept the survey open an extra 3 weeks. We went to extra lengths to contact LULAC and the Mexican Studies Department at the University of Houston. We contacted all of our Latino friends in the community. We asked them to pass the survey around. We called by phone. We personally visited with folks. But the number is what it is at the end. What we were concerned about is that we wanted to have a kind of a spread of our occupations We were looking for maybe, if you had 114, we would look for about a number of 11. We weren't pleased with some of the results. However, this is one that was encouraging. We found that 51 of our 114 claimed multiple professional areas, meaning that they covered many different kinds of planning areas. We were somewhat pleased with that. We were pleased with our response from the public safety sector and our general community planning, and of course our economic planners, our business folk. Now, the results were heavily slanted towards Harris County, suburban, urban. They weren't very well in terms of the rural, in terms of the rural areas, and these are some of the limitations of our results. Now, I'll do the best I can in the time I have before I get the yellow flag. Let's roll through these and bear with me. I'm going to roll through these. First question, sub-question, is the sustainability model in equilibrium? Does it achieve sustainability? When we polled our respondents, only 23% said that no one element dominates. That meant that the other 77% of them said that either economy, environment, or social equity dominated the model. If it dominates the model, if one or more of those elements dominate the model, it's not in symmetry, it's not in equilibrium, and therefore it is not sustainable by definition and function. Okay, so we asked questions on sustainable development. We asked that question was number 12. Which one has the most weight? 23% said, well, no one. So 23% said that. But, and on question 11, we said, well, how many of you believe that sustainable development is a desirable policy, whether we can, how we're going to achieve it or not? Of course, 89% or 90% of them said, yes, it is a desirable policy. But here's where Dr. Walter J. McCoy's cognitive dissonance comes in. When I asked the question, is sustainable development achievable using the 3 E's of equity, environment, and economy, 66% of them say yes. That didn't make sense. If you say it's out of balance, meaning one of the elements dominates, then how could you say then that it can achieve sustainability? So, a little cognitive dissonance. So we had to perform, as Dr. Ackpan tells us, you don't have research if you don't have statistics. So we had to apply a chi-square, a test of independence, to see how these answers are tied together. Very briefly, when we looked at it being desirable versus being achievable, we found, that there was a significant interaction between these two questions, meaning that they're not independent. They're both tied together. When we looked at question 12, which one carries the most weight versus being achievable, we found a significant interaction. However, we found that it was 25.96 less than the interaction between question 11 and 13. And lastly, asking again the question of the one element versus it being desirable, we found again a significant interaction, but it was 26.71% less. So what does this say to us? It says to us that there is a significant interaction and none of these things are independent. However, the respondents may desire and believe that the model will work, but as a matter of practice, 77% of them know by their professional experience that the model is not in equilibrium, therefore it is not sustainable. So our answer to question number 1 is, does it achieve sustainability? No. Transmogrification of the model, try to do it as quickly as possible. We have, did 9/11 change the model permanently? 62% of them said yes. Did Hurricane Katrina change the model permanently? 72% of them said yes. Did the Great Recession change the model? 64% of them said yes. We believe that the 72% higher response is because Katrina impacted us here locally more so than these other ones did. So And then we asked the question, is sustainable development possible without the addition of safety and security? 63% of those said no. Well, I was prepared at that point to say, well, see, that proves my point. But no, I have Dr. Cherie Smith, and she's not going for that. So I had to perform a one-way ANOVA, which is a analysis of variation. And she wanted to know, those who answered yes, Mr. Muhammad, with 9/11 and Katrina, I want to know if those same people answered the same way with sustainable development not being possible without adding your security and your safety elements, sir. So we looked and we performed the one-way ANOVA, and we found that when it comes to Katrina and when it comes to 9/11, there's no significant difference between the two. The results of the transformation of the model due to X events did not differ significantly from the results questioning the affirming sustainable development being achievable without adding those two elements. So lastly, we looked at resilience, Dr. Lowe, and we see the agreement with 91% of the people agreed with our definition of resilience. They agreed that resilience has to do with other conditions other than natural disasters, 96%. And they believe that caring for the most vulnerable during emergency situations increases the community's resilience by 79%. However, we asked the question, sustainability. We asked it, does sustainability, can you achieve sustainability without the consideration of resilience? The answer for them was no at 84%. Now, at this point, we didn't perform any additional statistical analysis, and we're not simply trying to confirm this question as being the resilience being applicable to planning theory just simply by frequencies. What we want to point out to you is that this result comes at the end of the survey. We've asked them a series of questions, 36 questions, and the last question that we asked, can you achieve sustainability without consideration of resilience? They had an opportunity at that point to say absolutely no, but we feel that it was strong enough because at the end of it all, and across all spectrums of the professions, we did receive a answer that confirmed that that resilience is yes, ma'am. Resilience is a okay. This is it. Equity is mediator. Equity is moderator. We found our results were strong in terms of it being a moderator, a mediator between environment and economy, emergency management and economy, civil defense and economy. Oh, I said that and civil defense and civil liberties. But equity is moderator in terms of economics, consumption, production. We got only a 51% return. Environmental justice, 64% return. Civil defense, 64%. And in terms of it moderating emergency management, 47%. So what does this mean? This means that we got a problem. Because if it won't moderate, then the model does not work. So we had to find out why that took place. What we did was we looked at all of the questions that came, those questions or the sections that came before these hypothesis questions. In other words, we asked the equity being the basis of resilience, we asked it 3 different ways, 3 times in the survey. The first time we asked it, we got an 82% return. That was a post-equity definition and limitations. These questions here, 22 through 24, dear panel. The second one, we asked it again, is equity enhanced resilience? We got an 83% return. That was a post-equity as mediator set of questions. But when we asked is the hypothesis questions, can equity serve as the basis of resilience? We got a 64% return, and I couldn't figure out why, so I just need to look at, so it was a post-equity as moderator question. Let me go to it right now. So we did a chi-square of independence. What we found was that there was a significant interaction between these post-equity definitions and that first hypothesis question that we stated. The same with the second one. We found that those questions that we asked as equity as a mediator, that indeed there was a significant interaction and they weren't independent of one another. And lastly, the hypothesis question, the main core hypothesis question, we looked at all of the post-equity as moderator questions, and there was a significant interaction, so they're not independent. So this led us to now give the hypothesis. Sub-question number 1, sustainability model, does it work? No. Number 2, was it transmogrified? Yes. The sub-question number 3, resilience, is it applicable? We say yes. In sub-question number 4, equity as mediator and moderator. As mediator, yes. As moderator, no. So therefore, the hypothesis question, we say equity is the basis of resilience. We have to say no. That being said, let's go to our conclusions, and I won't get the flag if I do this quickly. I mean, what does this all mean? What have we been doing for the last 7 years, you may ask? If at the end of it all, what you hypothesized didn't prove out. Man, that seemed like a 7-year waste of time. Wrong. Let me simply say this. This is what we proved. We proved what Scott Campbell said, that there is no sustainable future. And if we use the sustainability model that we've been operating off of since 1987, we don't have a strategy to achieve it. And so what we have proved, what our research has proved, is that the sustainability model is not in equilibrium. It must be changed because it is not sustainable. We also proved that this transformation by these X events, and that we must, as planners, add security and safety to all of our considerations going forward, at least in the near future. Asymmetrical warfare is going to be the course of the day. Two standing armies shooting at one another, that's no longer going to happen. We're going to have these things. Okay, Doc, okay. And we're going to have, continue to have weather-related, there's climate change, and we're going to have these extreme weather events. So we got to continue to prepare for our safety. We do say that even though we did not prove that equity is the basis of resilience, we do say that the 3 E's plus the 2 S's, safety and security, is a post-X event construct. And even though we did not prove in this study that equity is the basis of resilience, we did prove that no system model can be maintained or transformed if without moderating the elements of the subsystem. And lastly, Panarchy theory has limited application in planning, and there is no sustainability without the consideration of resilience, thinking, and practice. And for our discipline, what we would like to say is this, that planning theory and practice is not only operating in stasis, order, and predictability, but we've got to be able to handle rapid change, impactful, highly impactful, long-lasting, and unpredictable change. I say to us as planners simply this. This isn't about X events or not, and handling X events is not about thinking outside the box. From this point forward, we got to think there is no box, because everything we thought we knew is going to be challenged by the conditions that are about to come up. So lastly, my recommendations are that we expand the sustainability model to address X events. We continue research on equity-based modeling. We continue to explore and debate the utility of Panarchy theory, and we expand the research according to scale, not just on the community level, but we need to look at it on a national, global level. We also should get a larger sample that's reflective of the demography of this area, and including the non-white Hispanics, and include a diversity of occupations, and also, again, geography. We need to look at the rural as well as the suburban as well as the urban. I thank you for listening, and now we prepare for my panel's questions, and I wish y'all give me some water. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions from the audience of Robert? Anything? David?
I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Price.
I want to know, have you thought about any kind of other strategy to sort of kind of go do some additional research to get your response rate up? You know, because I thought about, you know, maybe did you explore using social media as well to get some data? What other sort of strategies did you use to try to increase your response rate?
Well, that was a concern. Again, we did social media, but it was very limited because we didn't just want to post it on Facebook and say, hey, y'all answer these questions. We don't know who you are. I had to send it through inbox professionals that I knew that were in those respective areas. Now, because it was an anonymous survey, when I received it back, I didn't know exactly who was responding and from necessarily what source. But because many of them self-identified themselves, and it was easy based upon the data that they gave that I knew that one, for instance, was an ex-mayor, ex-cabinet official, ex-police chiefs. They kind of gave that information away in some of the things. But yes, we're trying to explore that, and I want to look past this as in my postdoctoral research, is to, in fact, one of my recommendations, again, is to take this model and test it again, but in a wider, get more occupations involved, get the proper demographics as reflective of this region, and then again go reprove. I'm not through with this. You don't do something for 7 years and then just lay down. I'm gonna go back at this again because I really believe that this equity-based model and approach is the approach that planners have to take going forward. Sir, Professor Robinson.
Mr. Mohammed, fascinating. As you were talking, I'll just tell you some thoughts that ran through my head, and then I'll ask you my question. I was thinking, how could I apply this model in political science by the participation, voter participation, impacts equity, and how the model will pan out. But the question I have for you, the thought that kept running through my head is maybe the constant moderator may be change. You know, the species that adapt, the community that adapt, and whether it's a planned event or accidental event, the community changes and survives through that, as opposed to equity being the moderator. Okay. Equity may be an unintentional but not consistent outcome, but transformation, I can't get to Dr. Lewis's words, you know, those PhDs are above us JDs. But that may be a thought. It's just transformation is the constant.
Well, a wise man told me that when you don't know, you say you don't know. I don't know the answer to your specific question, Professor Robinson, but I do say that it's worth taking a look at. If equity does not prove out in the end to be the mediator and moderator of other base elements. For instance, let's look at transportation since you're picking on Dr. Lewis. If we had, for instance, that model, and at the top we have equity as the capstone, the mediator and moderator, and we're planning a transportation system for an area, then perhaps we want to have a proper balance of a pedestrian-friendly environment, meaning sidewalks, et cetera, and so forth. We may want to have buses. We may want to have trains. We may want to have, then the other fourth one could be parking ride. But the question is, how do we distribute the benefits and the burdens? Should park and ride and suburbanites get all of the money and all the attention? Or should we build sidewalks from here to everywhere? How do we balance that? So we want to look at the benefits and the burdens. What's consistent about it is that what we need to do, Professor Robinson, is look at the distribution of the benefits and the burdens. That's the purpose of equity. And when one thing gets out of whack, equity calls it back into its proper order so that it doesn't pull the rest of the system out of whack. And this is what we do consistently, unfortunately, is we have a problem over here, we run over here, we put all this money and resources over here, and we leave something else, and then it ill affects the whole system. Dr. Barrington?
Yeah, can you really get a balance between liberty / safety and security?
You can, but it's very difficult. And because it's difficult, we should not run from it. Because one of the great things about this nation, regardless of how we have suffered and others have suffered, is the fact that we do have a First Amendment with free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, or freedom from religion. And this gives us the ability to speak truth to power And that is real power of democracy, even though we live in a constitutional republic. So there is, you have to fight. We have to fight. We can't lay down. We can't be sheeple because we're afraid. We have to always guard our civil liberties at the same time while we guard our safety and our security. So I believe that's the purpose of equity, is to call those two things to the carpet and make sure one doesn't go all the way. So we can't be so free, or letting our children run out in the street and get run over by cars, are so free that we're not security minded and we allow someone to come into our church and kill and shoot 9 of us, or we have no security purposes. This is why the president has the beast and Secret Service. Well, equity says this. We not only should protect the airports, we should not only protect the courthouses, but we also should protect the neighborhoods and set up a security plan for the neighborhoods. We should not only have an emergency management plan to take care of our critical infrastructure, we should have a neighborhood emergency management plan that allows us to either shelter in place or to check on neighbor. We need to do those things on all scales going up. Ladies first, you mind? Yes, Dr. Shabazz.
I don't know what time of day it is. I don't know if it's the afternoon. This is good morning.
Good morning.
Fantastic presentation. I don't think I've actually been to a dissertation defense since my own. And so sitting here, I remember that walk in the wilderness. And I think that it kind of makes my stomach a little nervous to have to sit here to even walk through this with you. But my question is, because of the unknown of X, do you think that there is a model that could address any X variable? And, is there any model that you think, with that model that you're speaking of, address all X situations?
I'll put it this way, Dr. Shabazz. It's this. The unknown is the unknown. The model is what we have to understand is the model is simply saying that as planners, we cannot be so stuck in a particular theory or particular methodology or particular practice that doesn't allow us to change and be flexible and move like we have to move and apply whatever theory is necessary given the circumstance. Because different circumstances dictate different methodologies and different results. So the model is simply saying, though it is a pyramid which our African ancestors built on that continent that says immortality, permanence, but the equity capstone, if you look on the dollar bill, I'm not a good illustrator, but on the capstone, there's an all-seeing eye. In other words, that equity capstone is just simply to say to us is that resilience is not to change. Resilience is to change when necessary. So ultimately, that's what we need to do. We need to stay. Look, resilience isn't always good. Because if, for instance, the economic system breaks down, do we want it to come back status quo where we're still at the bottom and everybody's at the top? No, we want a whole nother arrangement. So resilience all times is not a good state to be in. What we need to have sometimes is the other aspect of resilience, which is the ability to adapt and transform to a higher stable state equilibrium so we all can get a little benefit from the society. I saw you. Yes, sir, Mr. Matazi. Walaikum salam, sir.
I want to make sure I walk away with this, because you know, a lot of information, high science, and whatnot, but the question I have is that, it's a two-part question. The first question is that, is it the poll that you took that brought you to the conclusion of that equity was not the correct model? And if that's the case, then could it be that the people that you polled could not see, didn't have the vision to see how this model could work?
All of that is possible. Just to walking you through the process we go and we do a literature review. We look at all of the literature that's available. And from that, we develop our hypothesis, what it is that we're trying to prove or disprove, okay? But we have to apply some kind of methodology to prove or disprove what we've come up with. So we put together, our method was to put together this survey and to ask our colleagues, what do you think about these ideas? So as I said in my conclusion, though in this study, equity was not proven to be the basis of resilience. That does not mean that it isn't. It just means my colleagues did not see it as such, and therefore I cannot stand before you and affirm that it is based upon the methodology that I used. It is possible because some of the literature does suggest that when they tried to implement resilience practice policy in Scandinavia, many of the people had to have it repeated to them, resilience repeated to them again and again and again, so that it became more familiar and easy to do. This is why I said in one of our slides or responses that Panarchy theory or resilience is applicable to planning theory, because what we did was throughout the survey, we repeated it again and again and again in different forms. And the very next to last question was, can sustainability be achieved without the consideration of resilience? They had every opportunity as intelligent sentinel beings to say no, but the majority of them said yes. And that's why we placed it where we placed it. And so we do believe that familiarity and a constant thing with resilience will do for resilience what new urbanism has been done, advocacy planning. But I'm not claiming that this theory or any theory is the panacea by which we'll solve all the problems. It will not. We've got to take what we can and make the changes while we can. Yes, sir.
Student Minister Muhammad, you said that Katrina was one of the X events. Your practical hands-on experience with going to the Astrodome, working with victims of Katrina, taking a tour and hearing from those victims, how does your practical experience inform your theory, practice, and influence a presentation like this?
In the end, the suffering, not only in New Orleans, and I want us to not, I just use those events to illustrate that. I think we're all familiar with those things. Katrina actually didn't hit New Orleans. It went past New Orleans. The biggest impact was in Mississippi, the Gulf Coast area, and Alabama. So the question also needs to be asked, how did the low-income poor people fare not only during Katrina, but in the rebuilding? What has informed my equity theory is in the rebuilding of New Orleans, for instance, it's not equitable. There's a whole nother economic and political paradigm that has been created there. And I often say that Katrina is ethnic cleansing by the Weather Channel.
How about that?
So for us and what we experienced, we saw that the least, the last, the lost, the left behind have to be cared for. No society is a society that does not care for its poor, its disabled, its people who can't fend for themselves. And so equity informs that, and that's what drives me. So I got that social justice thing in me, but at the same time, you know, we got to have the economy and the other things. Yes, Reverend Davis?
Minister.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask you regarding your data on the white Hispanic, Hispanic non-white, of course, the results of that, you know, what do you contribute to the data that you created on that and planning? Because that was a pretty miss, a low, you know.
I'm still, Reverend Davis, to be honest with you, I'm still wrestling with that because, I mean, I think many of you know, I know the movers and shakers in all the communities. I went to those people. I went to the politicians. I went to the community activists. I went to the educational person in the Hispanic community. I went to all of the social justice, LULAC, et cetera, and so forth. And I specifically sent the link and the request to those people and asked them to spread it in their community. Those are the results that I got. Even keeping the survey open an extra 3 weeks and making extraordinary efforts. Because what I did was I mailed it out. I didn't go above or beyond. But when I saw those Latino numbers, I said, oh, I have to do something a little extra. And so I did something a little extra. It still gave me those results. But that does bother me because of their population growth. And I need to understand, I need to look at occupationally, are they in these occupations? That may be a result of it. So I'm gonna have to do some other data mining, and I'm sure I probably gave myself extra work. So thanks for asking that question.
I'm just going to suggest that it's always an inherent weakness in a human sample in a survey, you know, as to whether people are honest, whether they even respond, you know, truthfully or respond at all. So, I mean, I think that you took whatever means and measures necessary to try to increase your sample, but it's always inherent weaknesses in a human sample.
Well, I'll say again, you know, it was, even though the sample, if you go through it, it took 15, 20 minutes to take it, and that's what I found most people did. But but what I found, we did get 186 responses, but I could only use 114 of them because people would start the survey, then look at it, and say, man, please. They just stopped. So many of them were so incomplete, I had no mineable data that I could get from it. But it's not an excuse, but it is a reason, and we must go back again and attempt to really focus on that particular ethnic group, that racial group, to see whether they concur or they don't with our hypothesis and our work. Let me go. Yes, Ms. Muhammad.
Mr. Muhammad, you said you got about 10% respondents. You said you sent out about 1,900?
1,900, yes, ma'am.
10%.
Yes.
Respondents. What would have been a good percentage for you?
I'm sorry?
What percentage were you looking for, hoping for?
I was looking for this is actually, I did a calculation, it's in my paper. I looked at the different levels of government, federal, state, local. I looked at the different types of occupations, and I did a calculation. My universe was 5,130. I sampled, the 1,900 represents about a 37%, 38% sample of that 5,100. I only got back 186, and in the end, it's like really, that 114 is like really just 6% of it. So my goal was to have 500, at least 500, so that would be 10%. So that was what I was looking for. But again, when you go into it, and every individual response is available to my committee or those who need for me to prove up, I have every one of those that we used in it. When you look at the quality of the people, this is why I highlighted who responded. People who are seasoned, staff and management. We see people who are over people who are CEOs of, for instance, the Greater Houston Partnership. CEO over the Harris County, the Houston-Galveston Area Council. These people are the people that responded. Former mayors. I don't want to drop no names. I'm just telling you, there's some good data in there in their responses and even in their qualitative responses. But that is, if I had an inherent weakness that I'm standing up here kind of cringing about, it is that number, that response. Someone else? I saw another hand.
Let me say this. There's
Dr. Lewis.
Hello, everyone. I'm
Hello,
really
Dr. Lewis.
impressed with the number of people who are here to hear Mr. Muhammad's defense. Great. But let me say this, that conducting research often leaves one disappointed with the response rate. And I've done a lot of this. And if we can get 3 to 5%, we're usually happy. And the only way you can get those numbers up is to increase the end. So the minister started with 1,900 something. In order to get more, you would have had to go to the entire 5,000, which we'll kind of remember this is a student project for which there was no underlying funding. And so to enlarge that number would have really required a lot. And I think, what we have here is a really honest, solid response rate at 6%. And I would have started off telling him if you get 3 to 5, you'll be, doing really well. So I'm not disappointed with it. I think the only thing is what he's actually done. If you were to see his report, he's named all of those things. And I think that's what's required of us at this point, to name the parameters, to name the limitations, and then move forward with what we have. So just to say, maybe it doesn't sound like 114 was a lot, but in general research, it's absolutely fine.
Okay. Dr. Price?
Yeah, I was gonna suggest what Dr. Lewis said, maybe seek some funding, sort of, seek some funding to do additional research. You may consider, say, giving some people an incentive to complete the survey as well. But one of the things I wanted for clarification, I I was wondering how you operationalize equity and resilience, because I don't know a lot about it, so I want to know how you operationalize those areas.
All right, I'll give you an example, equity. For instance, in emergency management, there are about 4 elements. There's mitigation, there's preparation, there's response, and there's recovery. Mitigation is more long-term. What do you do to mitigate against flooding? You can either do things to the natural environment. You can use softscape, trees, more grass, bushes, plants, et cetera, and so forth. And then on the other hand, there's hardscape. You do things like you widen the bios, you put cement, you put walls and barriers up. What does equity say based upon the money that we have available to us? We need to do a proper mix of both. So this is what equity does in terms of operation. And again, this is a theoretical model. So those questions are postdoctoral, which we're going to seek the funding to do. Okay, it's time. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. The flag has been thrown. I have to meet with my committee. I want to thank you all for coming out and your support.
Doctor,
Thank you, Karen.
congratulations.
Thank you, Karen, for
All
being
right.
here. Thank you so much. It means the world to me for you being here. Thank you so much.
Change your name to Doc instead of Chief.
Inshallah. We'll see. We'll see what they